French Connection, The Conversation, Superman. Gene Hackman has died at the age of 95.
For decades, Gene Hackman was a Hollywood icon, his name synonymous with some of the greatest performances in film history. From gripping crime dramas to intense thrillers, he commanded the screen like few others. But in his later years, he chose a different path, one of quiet seclusion, far from the cameras and red carpets, living a peaceful life with his wife, Betsy. That peace was shattered by a discovery no one saw coming: a 911 call, a panicked voice, and inside their secluded home, a chilling scene: Gene and Betsy found dead under circumstances that defied explanation. No signs of forced entry, no immediate evidence of foul play. At first, the answer seemed simple: carbon monoxide poisoning, a silent killer known to strike without warning. But as investigators searched for clues, that theory crumbled. No leaks, no gas issues, no clear cause of death. What really happened in the final days of Gene and Betsy Hackman? The truth was far more unsettling. The call came in just after noon. A caretaker, his voice shaken, reporting something deeply unsettling. He had arrived at the Hackman residence for what should have been a routine check, but something wasn't right. The front door stood wide open, an eerie silence hanging over the property. Then, the chilling realization: something had happened inside. At first, his words were uncertain, almost hesitant. He reported finding someone inside, then quickly corrected himself. There were two people, and one of them was deceased. A strange slip, one that raised immediate questions. Had he truly just stumbled upon the scene? Or did he already know more than he was letting on? Then came another contradiction. He insisted the house was locked, that he hadn't gone inside. But if that were true, how did he know there were two bodies? How did he know where they were? He claimed to have seen Betsy through a window, lying on the bathroom floor, unresponsive. But Gene? He was found in the mudroom, far from any window. The pieces didn't add up. When authorities arrived, they stepped into what felt like a crime novel brought to life. Gene Hackman, a man known for his strength and presence, was found collapsed just inside the home, as if he had been trying to leave but never made it. His wife, Betsy, lay in the bathroom, a scattering of pills surrounding her. A portable heater sat nearby, its presence an odd and unexplained detail. And then, the most bizarre element of all: the dog, one of their beloved pets, locked inside a closet. Lifeless. The question wasn't just how or why the dog had died, but why it had been put there in the first place. Had someone placed it there? And if so, why? Nothing about the scene made sense. No sign of forced entry, no struggle, no immediate evidence of foul play. But something felt off. Something was missing. Investigators moved quickly, looking for the most obvious explanation: a gas leak. Carbon monoxide poisoning was a common killer, silent and deadly. It could easily explain why the couple, and even their dog, had perished without warning. Fire crews swept the home with specialized equipment, searching for any trace of the toxic gas. They found nothing: no leaks, no ventilation issues, no faulty appliances. The air inside was clean. Whatever had happened in that house, it wasn't carbon monoxide. That left investigators with a far more troubling reality. If it wasn't an accident, then what was it? A medical emergency? A tragic coincidence? Or was there something much darker lurking beneath the surface? And as they dug deeper, the story only grew stranger. When news of Gene and Betsy Hackman's deaths broke, the initial theory seemed almost too obvious. Carbon monoxide poisoning. A silent, odorless killer. It had happened before. Entire families wiped out in their sleep, unaware they were breathing in their own demise. A heater left running, a blocked vent. A leak so small it went undetected until it was too late. The pieces seemed to fit. Gene collapsed in the mudroom as if he had been trying to escape. Betsy, motionless in the bathroom, pills scattered beside her. Even their dog, lifeless in a closet, suggested something more than coincidence. No signs of a break-in, no obvious violence, just an entire household gone. Firefighters arrived first, equipped with advanced detection tools designed to pick up even the faintest traces of carbon monoxide. They checked everything: the vents, the heating system, the appliances, the air itself. If there had been a buildup of toxic gas, it would have been there, but there was nothing. No leaks, no deadly fumes, no signs that carbon monoxide had played any role at all. The house was clean, the air was safe. The first and most logical explanation had just been wiped off the board. Investigators weren't ready to give up on the theory just yet. They brought in specialists from the gas company, hoping for a second opinion. Another sweep, another chance to find something they may have missed. But once again, the results came back the same. No gas leaks, no carbon monoxide, no mechanical failures. It simply didn't make sense. If it wasn't carbon monoxide, then what was it? This was where the case took a darker turn. The assumption had been that this was a tragic accident, a quiet passing in their own home. But with the most obvious cause of death ruled out, new and far more troubling questions began to emerge. Was this really just a terrible coincidence? A sudden medical emergency striking both Gene and Betsy within the same time frame? Or was there something else at play? The pills near Betsy, Gene's collapsed body in a different room, the dog locked away in a closet. These weren't details that fit neatly into an accidental poisoning. They suggested something more deliberate, something that hadn't happened by chance. The investigation was no longer about confirming an accident. It was about uncovering the truth. And whatever had happened inside that house, one thing was certain. It wasn't as simple as it first seemed. The autopsy results revealed something unsettling. Gene and Betsy Hackman had been dead for nearly 2 weeks before anyone realized. 2 weeks of complete silence. No phone calls made, no messages answered, no signs of life from inside their secluded home. For most people, 2 weeks without any contact would raise alarms. A missed doctor's appointment, a concerned friend checking in, a neighbor noticing the house unusually quiet. But for Gene and Betsy, nothing. No one sounded the alarm. No one seemed to realize they had vanished. It wasn't until their caretaker arrived that the world even learned something was wrong. But by then, it was far too late. The house had been untouched. The bodies had already started mummifying. It wasn't just that they had passed. It was that no one had been looking for them. How does a couple worth an estimated $80 million, a man who had spent decades in the public eye, disappear so completely? How did no one, not a family member, not a financial advisor, not a household worker, notice their absence? The silence surrounding their deaths was deafening. It painted a picture of isolation. But was it by choice or by design? Reports suggest Gene and Betsy had largely withdrawn from public life, choosing privacy over the chaos of Hollywood. But even recluses don't go completely unnoticed. They had a caretaker, property maintenance, financial managers, people who should have noticed when something was wrong. And then there was the money, $80 million, a number that raises even more questions. With both of them gone, their estate was suddenly in play. Their wealth, real estate, investments, assets, would need to be settled. So, who stood to inherit? Who had access to their finances? Was there an updated will? Were there disputes over their estate? Gene had 3 children, but only one made a public statement after his death. The others? Complete silence. No tributes, no demands for answers, no visible grief. Why? Had they been estranged from their father? Had they lost touch? Or was something else keeping them quiet? And what about their inner circle? Longtime friends, business associates, former colleagues. Why was no one asking more questions? The unsettling timeline of their deaths wasn't just about how long it took for them to be found. It was about what those 2 weeks represented. A void, a gap where someone, anyone, should have noticed their absence. The deaths of Gene and Betsy Hackman weren't just tragic. They were unnoticed, unquestioned, almost as if someone had been waiting for exactly that to happen. With no clear answers, investigators were left to consider the possibilities. What had really happened inside Gene and Betsy Hackman's home in their final moments? Was it a medical tragedy, an accident, or something far more sinister? At 94 years old, Gene Hackman was no stranger to the realities of aging. Though he had stepped away from Hollywood years ago, reports suggested he had experienced health struggles. Could he have suffered a fatal medical episode, perhaps a stroke or heart attack, collapsing in the mudroom, unable to call for help? And if Betsy had discovered him like that, helpless, unresponsive, already gone, did she spiral into despair? The scattered pills in the bathroom suggest the possibility of an overdose. But if this was the case, why were they found in separate rooms? Wouldn't Betsy have stayed beside Gene, tried to reach someone, called for help? And why were no outgoing calls made from the house? If this was simply a tragic case of old age and grief, why did it unfold in such an eerily silent way? Then there's the dog, locked in a closet. If Betsy had taken her own life, how does that detail fit into the picture? Had she locked the dog away beforehand, not wanting it to interfere? Or was the dog's death an accident? If so, it's an unsettling coincidence that raises more questions than it answers. Another possibility is that something happened between Gene and Betsy that night. An argument, an accident, something that spiraled out of control. Could they have gotten into a heated dispute? One that led to an unintended tragedy? Did Gene, in frustration, attempt to leave, only to collapse before making it out the door? If so, why didn't Betsy call for help? Was she in shock, panicked, unable to process what had happened? Or could the roles have been reversed? Did Betsy suffer a sudden medical event, leaving Gene unable to help her? Did he attempt to get assistance, only to fall victim to his own health issues in the process? Again, the dog remains an anomaly. A beloved pet, inexplicably locked in a closet. Was it put there in the chaos of the moment? Or was it meant to be kept away from something no one wanted it to see? The condition of their bodies suggested that neither had been moved after death. They died where they fell. But if this was a dispute, an accident, something unplanned, why the silence? Why did no one notice they were gone for so long? Then there's the theory that lingers in the shadows, the idea that their deaths weren't entirely natural at all, that someone, somewhere, knew they were vulnerable, that they were isolated, cut off, and that no one would come looking for them. Could Gene and Betsy have been victims of neglect? Were they left alone for too long, with no one checking on them until it was too late? If so, why? Who was responsible for their well-being? And then, the bigger question, was there someone who stood to gain from their deaths? With an $80 million estate at stake, the possibility of financial motives cannot be ignored. Did someone see an opportunity in their isolation? The caretaker's 911 call remains a focal point of suspicion. His statements were inconsistent, his knowledge of the scene contradicting his own claims. He said the house was locked, yet the front door was wide open. He knew both Jean and Betsy were dead before stepping inside. How? Could someone have entered that house before authorities arrived? Could the scene have been altered? If so, by whom? And for what purpose? Each of these theories offers a possible answer, yet none fully explain everything. A medical tragedy, a heated argument, a calculated act, each leaves pieces of the puzzle missing. What truly happened in Jean and Betsy Hackman's final days? And more importantly, who, if anyone, knows more than they are letting on? When a Hollywood legend passes away, the world takes notice. Tributes pour in. Fans mourn. Friends and colleagues share memories. Family members release heartfelt statements. But in the case of Jean Hackman, something strange happened. Silence. Only one of his 3 children publicly acknowledged his death. The others? Nothing. No statements. No social media posts. No visible grief. It wasn't just quiet. It was total absence. For a man who had shaped cinema for decades, a 2-time Academy Award winner, one of the most respected actors of his time, the lack of public mourning was unsettling. Was this a family that had grown distant over the years? Or was there something more to their silence? No calls for justice, no pleas for more answers, no sense of urgency in uncovering what really happened inside that house. Did they already know something the public didn't? But it wasn't just the family. The silence stretched beyond them. Friends, former colleagues, the people you'd expect to speak out, to question the bizarre nature of his death, said almost nothing. A quiet passing, almost unnoticed, for a man who had once dominated the silver screen. And then there was the timeline. Nearly 2 weeks passed before anyone found them. A property worth millions. A man and his wife dead inside. And no one noticed. A house like theirs required upkeep, maintenance workers, landscapers, security personnel, people who should have been on the property, people who should have seen something. Why did no one check in? Were their services put on hold? Or had they been told to stay away? There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no locks tampered with. That meant one of 2 things. Either no one had checked on them, or whoever was inside had a key. Who had access to the house? Who had been inside in the days leading up to their deaths? If there were regular staff, why hadn't they reported anything unusual? Was this a couple that had pushed people away, retreating into seclusion? Or were they kept in isolation by someone else? Then there was the money, the sheer scale of their estate, an estimated $80 million in assets. Homes, investments, personal wealth built over a lifetime. And now, with both of them gone, all of it was up for grabs. Had they updated their will recently? Were there disputes over their estate? Had anyone been pressuring them in the final years of their lives? Because when that kind of wealth is involved, people notice. People fight over it. Yet, in this case, no one was asking questions. No one was demanding answers. Had Jean and Betsy truly chosen to live in isolation? Or had someone ensured that they were alone? Jean Hackman lived a life in the spotlight, but in his final days, he vanished into the shadows. And after his death, those shadows only grew darker. Even with all the theories, all the speculation, the case of Jean and Betsy Hackman remains full of holes. Too many unanswered questions. Too many strange inconsistencies. Every detail that should provide clarity only leads to more confusion, and at the center of it all, one of the strangest elements in the case, the dog. Why was it locked inside a closet? If carbon monoxide poisoning had been the cause, the dog would have died where it stood, just like Jean and Betsy. But it didn't. Someone placed it there. A dog doesn't walk into a closet and lock itself inside. Someone put it there and shut the door. Was it meant to be hidden? Was someone trying to silence it? Dogs react to danger. They bark. They scratch at doors. They alert their owners. If something, or someone, was inside that house, that dog would have reacted. So, who locked it away? And more importantly, when? If the dog had been alive inside the closet for any length of time, it would have barked, cried, tried to get out. But neighbors, if they heard anything, never reported it. Was the dog placed in there long before its death? Had it been intentionally removed from the scene? And if the dog was deliberately locked away, what else had been tampered with? That leads to another major red flag: the caretaker's 911 call. His behavior, his wording, his inconsistencies. His report was the first version of the story the world would hear. But was it reliable? He first claimed to have found one person. Then, almost immediately, he corrected himself. There were two. A strange mistake to make. Had he simply panicked? Or had he expected to find only one? Then there was the biggest contradiction of all. He claimed the house was locked. But when authorities arrived, the front door was wide open. If he never went inside, how did he know where the bodies were? How did he know they were unresponsive? How did he even know they were both dead? And if the house was truly locked, that meant one thing. Whoever had been inside last had a key. Who else had access to the home? Did the Hackmans have staff? Close friends who regularly visited? A housekeeper? A financial advisor? Or was it something else entirely? Had someone entered the home in the days prior to their deaths and never left? It's hard to ignore the possibility of a cover-up, the inconsistencies, the caretaker's strange call, the missing 2 weeks when no one checked on them, the silence from their family and friends. Was this simply a tragic and overlooked death of an aging couple? Or was someone actively working to make it look like an accident? If so, what was being hidden? And more importantly, by who? Had something happened inside that house that someone didn't want the world to know? Had a dispute gone too far? Had there been another person involved? Someone who had access? Someone who left no trace? Could the scene have been altered before authorities arrived? Was Jean truly found collapsed near the door? Was Betsy really found in the bathroom surrounded by pills? Or had they been moved? Their positions carefully staged to create a specific narrative? Forensic investigators would have noted if anything appeared out of place. But if this was a slow, quiet manipulation, something that took place over those missing 2 weeks, then any potential evidence may have already been lost. And then there's the one factor that always raises questions in cases like this: money. The Hackman's estate was worth an estimated $80 million. That's not a number that goes unnoticed. With both Jean and Betsy gone, everything was left up in the air. Who was next in line to inherit? Had there been an updated will? Were there legal disputes over their fortune? Had someone, family, staff, a business associate, stood to gain from their deaths? Because when that kind of wealth is involved, it's rarely simple. It creates opportunities. It creates motives. And what makes this case even stranger? No one seems to be asking those questions. Gene Hackman wasn't just a Hollywood legend. He was a man who spent decades in the spotlight. And yet, when he died, his story was quietly pushed aside. No high-profile investigations, no public outcry, just silence. His family, his friends, his inner circle. No one demanded answers. It's as if, after years of being one of the most recognizable names in Hollywood, Gene Hackman disappeared without a trace. The investigation may have closed. The official reports may have been filed. But something about this case still doesn't feel right. There are too many gaps, too many inconsistencies, too many lingering questions. And the biggest one of all remains: what really happened inside Gene and Betsy Hackman's home in those final, silent days? The mystery surrounding Gene and Betsy Hackman's deaths remains as unsettling as ever. Was it a tragic medical emergency, with Gene collapsing and Betsy taking her own life in despair? Did an argument spiral into an irreversible accident? Or was there something more, something hidden beneath the surface? Investigators ruled out carbon monoxide poisoning, but beyond that, few definitive answers have been given. No official signs of foul play, yet too many inconsistencies remain. Contradictions in the 911 call, the locked-away dog, and the eerie silence from their closest family and friends. Was this simply a heartbreaking end to a quiet life? Or is there more to this story than meets the eye? What do you think happened? Was it a tragic accident? Or is there a darker truth waiting to be uncovered? Let us know your theories in the comments. And if any new information comes to light, we'll be here to break it down, piece by piece, until we get to the truth.